Good afternoon, all, and welcome to our presentation today, Creating a Culture for Success with Peer Support Services. I'm Yvette Kelly, the co-director of PeerTAC, and today I'm joined by several of my colleagues from the McSilver Institute and the Academy of Peer Services. We also have a number of presenters today who will be sharing their expertise and knowledge around building a successful organizational culture that supports peer services and integration. So welcome. I do apologize. I'm having some tech issues. All right. So as we continue to assess the training needs of providers and expand our reach, it's always helpful for us to know who has joined the webinar. So if you can please take a few minutes to complete the poll question that is going to pop up momentarily by letting us know in what capacity you've joined us today. That will be helpful. And we'll give you just a few minutes to respond to that. And so while we're waiting for the responses to come in, it would also be helpful for us to know what types of peer services agencies are considering implementing within their clinic setting. So if you could just take a moment and chat that in the response in the chat box, that would be great as well. Again, it just helps us kind of refine our offerings and really assess need. Okay, and so while you're doing that, just to say that the presentation for today will be recorded, and the slides and recording will be made available and posted to our page, peertac.org. And so you should be able to access the recording and slides within the next day or so. Okay, so it looks like our folks have answered our poll questions. So we have, looks like the majority of folks who've joined us are peer support specialists or advocates. We have a good number of clinic leaders and managers and some supervisors in the call, and then some others. So thank you all for joining us. If you have identified it as other, it's helpful for us to know who that is. So again, feel free to chat that into the chat box. But just thank you all for joining us. I also want to encourage you to chat in any questions that you may have for our presenters today. In the event we're not able to attend to your questions because we do have quite a packed agenda, I want to encourage all of you to join our consultation call, which is scheduled for next Thursday, where our participants will have the opportunity to ask our presenters any outstanding questions that you have. So again, I want to encourage you to do that, and you can sign up for the consultation call on our page, again, peertac.org. So just to share a little bit about PeerTAC, this is just a reminder that PeerTAC has been established with funding through the Office of Mental Health to facilitate the inclusion of peer support services in mental health settings. Our role in PeerTAC will be to provide training and technical support to help make that inclusion process go smoothly. And to that end, again, PeerTAC has been established to deliver training, technical assistance, and consultation to mental health organizations serving people across the lifespan, living with mental health conditions. Our immediate focus, though, is on the expansion of peer support services within the mental health outpatient treatment and rehabilitative services program. And so, again, that's why we're offering these webinars, and happy to have you join us today. There are two organizations that were chosen to support this effort. It's the Academy of Peer Services, which is managed by Rutgers University, and NYU's McSilver Institute in collaboration with Families Together in New York State and Youth Power. But as you can see, there are many more organizations who are lending a helping hand and providing their expertise, and we're excited to have them with us today. So here's our objectives for today's presentation. We are going to identify how organizational culture is related to recovery and resilience, recognize factors that make or break the success of the peer support program, evaluate how prepared your organization is to include peer support services, and to really consider a plan for involving your whole organization in welcoming peer specialists and advocates. And so here's our lineup for today, our agenda and our presenters. We will begin the presentation really by discussing organizational culture and what a successful culture looks like. We'll then move on to talk about organizational readiness and identify some tools for consideration, and then conclude the presentation with contracting for services. I am going to ask our presenters today if you could just provide a brief introduction prior to your portion of the presentation. That would be appreciated. And once again, we appreciate everyone just taking the time to join us and hope you find the information presented today helpful and informative to your role. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Joanne.
Thank you, Yvette, and hello, everyone. Welcome. It's delightful to be here with you today. My name is Dr. Joanne Forbes. I currently am working as a consultant with the Academy of Peer Services in Rutgers University, rolling out some specialized training for certified peer specialists. I have a long experience and history in both working within the system and also as a peer supporter and peer advocate. And so what I would like to share with you today is just kind of a trailer into some of those experiences. And I'm going to start by saying something that you may find startling. I'm going to start by saying, you know, it turns out that a belief in recovery is critical to creating a culture of success. And many of you on this webinar may be saying, yeah, we knew that. And I'm glad that you do. I am sharing that with you because my journey did not start in that place. I did have the good fortune to begin my career working in a very progressive New York State psychiatric hospital, South Beach Psychiatric Center. And it was based on the values put forth in the Community Mental Health Center Act. That was federal legislation passed under the Kennedy administration. That may be before your time, but it was transformative at that time. And the hospital where I worked was literally built brand new and built to espouse those values. And so as a new facility, our efforts were really focused on community education and prevention. We were all very young, we were all very naive, but we were all determined. And we really thought at that time, I'm going to change my slides here. My slides are not progressing, folks, if someone could thank you. So when I say you can get there from here, we really thought at that time that if we were able as a society to address poverty and to fix civil rights, that we would not have to hospitalize anyone ever again. Perhaps a naive position, but it was with good intentions. My education at that time was a master's degree in psychiatric nursing. And so, like the rest of my colleagues, my education, however, suggested that persons diagnosed with mental illness were unfortunately facing a chronic condition with a predictable downward spiral. That belief is now referred to as the clinician's illusion. But then I can tell you that was all that we knew. And as an educator and a teacher, I can tell you that much of what colleagues are learning still seem to suggest that that is the truth. Next slide, please. So getting there is a journey, and particular journey I'm sharing with you is just an outline of possible steps that you might want to consider. We were fortunate enough to have a very progressive education department at the hospital, and they began offering trainings from the likes of Bill McFarland, Bill Anthony, and very progressive notables like Dr. Ed Knight, Joe Rogers, Moira Fitzpatrick, Dan Fisher. For those who don't know those names, that last group of folks were the pioneers in self-help and mutual self-help. They were spreading the word of self-help and recovery. At that time, I was director of community relations and community education, and I was working directly under the CEO of the hospital. It was from Dr. Ed Knight that I learned about the research from Courtney Harding and George Brooks, which really was the research that pointed us to recovery. It was the first time I heard about recovery and self-help. Never had heard about it before until Ed Knight, a peer himself with a history of 23 years in a back ward, a state hospital, who came out of there and got his doctorate, and the rest is history, as we say. But I didn't know about recovery. My colleagues didn't know about recovery. And after listening to Dr. Knight, all of a sudden there were people in recovery all around us. I'd just never seen them before. So getting there is a journey, as I said. It means creating partners. It means taking a deep breath and realizing that maybe things can be different. So with support from the hospital administration, we all pivoted to embrace the promise of recovery. And what we did is we hired a very skilled facilitator by the name of Ike Powell, who began a series of dialogues between all levels of staff and those self-identified back then as psychiatric survivors. We consulted with people like Joe Rogers and Ed Knight and Peter Ashenden and those pioneers. And we brought in these teams of folks to spread the word, but also continue those conversations. And they were conversations. This was not an autocratic, this is what we're doing, whether you like it or not. This was an all-inclusive, we're going to do this together. We're going to figure it out together. Yes, we don't know what we're doing, but we know where we want to go, and we're determined to get there. We were focused primarily at that time on employment because we heard from people in recovery that they wanted to work. I've always said they wanted everything that everybody else wants, right? They want someone to love, a place to live, and I always said a blonde and a puppy. I mean, you know, normal things. So we created the first and probably only Department of Customer Service in a psychiatric hospital. And the staff of that customer service department were all folks who identified with lived experience and as peers. We started in our outpatient system, which was very huge, covered Brooklyn and Staten Island. I think we had 4,000 clients at that time. But eventually the customer service reps, because that's what we call them, migrated to inpatient. And lots of opportunities were created under the banner of each one, teach one. So peers, whether they were customer service reps or folks who were receiving services, came together to create wellness days, wellness community, a consumer network that was available for people to just drop in and chat and meet other individuals who had found their way to recovery. And it turned out that we were creating a community of like-minded individuals really dedicated to getting their lives back. Next slide, please. So we had a partnership between the hospital and the customer service department, but we recognized that we needed more. So the customer service reps, the peers, and myself applied for funding for peer advocacy and were granted a very small amount of money created something called Baltic Street Peer Advocacy Program. And that program then started its own journey to creating a peer-run organization that was sustainable, that was independent, that was able to partner full circle back with the hospital and provide services that range from advocacy to bridger services, employment, housing. So when I say you can get there from here, what I'm really wanting to share with you in this very brief time that I have, it's okay if you've not been there before. And if it's okay that you don't know what you're doing, you're not alone. But the journey is worth it. I can swear to you that we had no idea what we were doing. And I say that with pride at this point, because what I recognize is that it really, all it took was the willingness to do it and to create a vision. And that vision for us was there. There meant we were building a culture built by a team of service users, peer supporters, and other allies that knew how important this idea of recovery was. And so, was there resistance? Of course there was. But the commitment by the administration and by the majority of staff through their awakening and dialogues and conversation was clear. This is the future. And for those who just didn't see it and couldn't see it at that time, it was like, take some time and take another look. Maybe this isn't for you. It sounds harsh as I say that, but in fact, the message that encouraged non-peer staff to get involved ended up creating absolute excitement, creativity, innovation, because after all, at the end of the day, staff chose this field. They chose to work in behavioral health because they wanted to help people. The same reason that peers, people with lived experience, become peer supporters, because they want to give back, they want to help people. And at the end of the day, I want to conclude with saying that we created a culture that worked. We created a different vision. And people recognized that people can and do get better. And that recognition was a magnet and a beacon that was really held high for everyone to see. And the rest is history. Baltic Street has been around for 30 some years now. It's one of the largest national peer-run agencies, and as you saw, is a partner also in this effort. So I just wanted to share my experience, strength, and hope from this journey and say to you that you really can get there from here. I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Lori Ashcraft, who continues the story.
Thank you, Joanne. It's really such an honor to be here with you today. I'm in California, so it's raining and we're really happy about that. Not raining too much. That's the key. We just have a really brief period, so I'm going to kind of quickly tell you our story. Chris is going to come along behind me and give you some kind of hardcore information about some of the things we've learned. And then we'll be back for the consultation next week, where we hope we can have time to share some tools with you. So our journey started in the year 2000. And both my husband and I had lived experience. He with substance abuse and a few other things, and me with a lot of depression, anxiety, eating disorder, and a few other things. And we were working. So we knew it was possible to recover from our own experience. Was it easy? No, but it was possible. And we didn't see ourselves as any different from the people who were using our services. So we knew if we could do it, they could do it. As long as we didn't get distracted by how people were presenting themselves, because they were often presenting themselves as mental patients, because that's what we told them they were. So we got a little grant, $20,000, and we trained 15 people that we plucked out of case management caseloads, all of whom were on SSI for a mental illness. We didn't know what we were doing. We did the best we could to train them to be something we called peers, and we weren't even sure what that was. And then we hired them. And then we trained another class and another class and another class. By the time we were through in 2014, we had a workforce of 600 peer employees. We had about 1,100 employees altogether, but 600 of them were peers. And they basically changed us significantly. They helped us understand what worked and what didn't work. And we listened and we made the changes. And I remember early on being presented with this policy and procedure manual. And my husband saying, technically you're supposed to work within these guideline things here. And I thought, wouldn't that be like pouring new wine into old wineskins? We're going to either break the wineskins or we're going to turn out to just be like everything else. And that's not who we want to be. So we were given the opportunity to make up our own policies as we went along. And the way we did that is when we hit a snag, we stopped and looked at it. And it wasn't just me, it was all of us. By this time we had probably 70 peers working with us. We go, oops, what happened here? Let's stop and take a look at this. And let's make a policy about it. Our policies didn't look like the classic 2.2.3.A, blah, blah, blah. They were more like, when this happens, what can we all do? And how can we keep it from happening again? And let's set some parameters around being able to identify this when it happens and knowing what to do. So we created our own policies that, finally they caught up with us and they had to kind of morph into the classic policy thing. But we did have an opportunity to really come up with our own rules of the road. And that's how we learned about culture. We learned how to shift culture. It has a lot to do with leadership. It has a lot to do with everyone having a voice. It has a lot to do with respect of everybody, the staff, the peers, the people we're serving. And it has everything to do with love. And that means loving the people we're serving. And sometimes that's a challenge, but it's a journey worth taking. And that framed our work from that point forward. So I could go on for a really long time because we learned so much from our mistakes as well as our successes. But Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you now to kind of get down to some of the more tangible things.
Yeah, thanks, Lori. I'm going to try to keep it light. I want to say that I also have a liver recovery experience, and I've been so blessed to work with my dear friend and colleague, Lori. Oh, gosh, it's been over 25 years almost. And so like Lori said, we had the extreme fortune to work in an organization where 60% of our staff were peer support specialists, mixed in with psychiatrists, nurses, behavioral health techs, you name it, counselors. So we had a living learning laboratory, which was so wonderful, where we were able to kind of learn from what was happening and what it means to have an integrated workforce. And so we developed a 2-day class for leaders called Recovery Practices for Leaders, and then one for the whole organization, an 8-hour workshop called Recovery Practices for Organizations. And I'm going to share with you, just a kind of a real synthesized way, some points from that 2-day skill-based training. the first thing we understood in our experience was there's something called culture shifting conditions that need to occur if an organization recovers. And by the way, I'm assuming we all know that organizations can recover, right? Just like people, even CEOs can recover, as Gene likes to say. So the first shifting condition is adding a critical mass of peer support specialists. So when an organization takes on a lot of peer support specialists, all of a sudden, people that work in the organization start to shift what they're doing and how they're talking. And it actually changes things, sometimes even unconsciously. The second thing is shedding what Lori calls the D list. That's all that deficit-based kind of orientation we have, to something called the A list, and that's asset and strength-based. So we actually do this across the board, like Lori said, in our policies, in our practices, the way we work with people, our language, recovery language, etc. Then we start to shift how it's relating through relationship. We like to say having a real relationship. And even if we are a clinical person, a counselor, maybe there's sometimes we don't disclose things, yet we can be real with people, right? We learned that the mighty middle, those supervisors, middle management people, are the people that really drive the culture. So we really pay attention to supporting the mighty middle be superheroes when it comes to recovery culture. We also have a lot in our workshops and our training with specific tools for recovery work and outcomes used by the peer support specialist and some by other folks in the organization. We also very much are about inspecting what we're expecting and getting out of like what we like to call the black hole of supervision. That's where the supervisor can disappear in their cube or behind their closed office door, instead of out there really leading and coaching the recovery work and supporting the folks in professional development. And finally, having tools and ways to retain or sustaining the recovery culture. We take a lot of emphasis on that. Okay.
Just back, you have a second.
Yeah.
You mentioned tools. We can share a lot of tools with you next week. So we won't go into them now, but we have a lot of tools we can share.
Yeah. And then we have in the training, we have 10 characteristics of a recovery and discovery culture. We use the word discovery because besides being a person who lived recovery experience, I'm also a family member. And for young people, the word recovery doesn't always resonate, but discovery is, because they're still identifying who they are. So we found that what supports recovery and discovery culture is having a welcoming, warm, and inviting environment. Like Lori says, having a welcome sign on the door instead of no shirt, no shoes, no service, right? Smiling, hopeful, and positive energy demonstrated by the staff, where as much as possible, everyone is mutual and there's non-hierarchical elements about the organization, where we learn how to empower people so they can take their power, right, that they already have, but working with them in a way to facilitate that. Person-centered, striving toward being person-directed. Peer support, once again, a real strong characteristic of a recovery discovery culture. Solution-focused, relationship-oriented, and trauma-informed. Again, I'm kind of synthesizing 2 days of workshop that actually is very skill-oriented. Okay, and then some tools that we would like to tell you about. Well, we can talk a little bit more about them, like Lori said, next time. We'd love to share them fully with you down the road. So we have peer support tools for recovery work, and you can see they and you can download this slide, but resilience conversations, self-directed resilience plan, these are all tools that peer support specialists use in working with people. Oftentimes peer support specialists are set out to work and they have no tools to work with. So this kind of came again from our living laboratory, knowing we need to have people need concrete ways to employ their skills in the work they do with serving people. And then we also have a lot of leadership tools to sustain a recovery culture.
And sustainability is the key word there, Chris.
Absolutely.
Tools help us sustain what we're doing.
Absolutely.
If they wear out, we make new tools that work better for the future, but it keeps us on the same page and working creatively together.
Absolutely. And so then we have some culture transforming courses we do. Lori and I have done this all over the United States, different parts of the world, from Singapore, New Zealand to United Kingdom to Canada. I think I got all four corners. Peer support training for the 21st century. We have a crisis specialization course called Recovery Responders. Recovery Practice for Org, like I mentioned, Recovery Practice for Leaders. Something called the Resilient Culture Playbook, how a supervisor can retain the recovery culture in a weekly way. Supporting family resilience and more. So, and we have on-site formats for that. If you download the slide, you can find out more about our courses by contacting Jim or visiting our webpage. And you also see a lot of free downloadable things. We have some free downloadable classes, including workbooklets and facilitator guides. So feel free to take advantage of those.
Also, feel free to get in touch with Chris and I between now and next week if you want to. We'd be happy to talk with you.
Absolutely. So I'm going to share my screen here once I'm allowed to do that. Thank you. And so let me just share with you that a long time ago, Lori and I were consulting for a behavioral health organization. I won't give the name out to protect the innocent, but it had pretty much national renown, some would say world renown. And we're asked to actually help support that organization, who was really known for their recovery reputation. And what happened was there were leadership changes, events happened, and there was mission drift. And that goes back to that sustaining importance that Lori was talking about. So we were asked to kind of go in and look at what was happening and how we could support them in getting back. And one of the things I did in our work was I interviewed many of the supervisors there who had remembered what it was like in the old days when they were a thriving recovery organization, and some of the employees. And they shared with me some of the things they needed to do to get back on track. So we had our videographer, which happened to be my son, Christopher, put a video together, which actually had the words of these leaders sharing what we need to do as an organization, what they need to do to get back to the recovery way of being. And it's all about shifting. And I'm going to actually show you a little short video right now. And this up here, okay. And okay, this should work. Here we go. Watch if you will. And
No sound, Chris.
oh, okay. Let me try that again then. Okay. Sorry, folks. Okay. For some reason, I'm having
Chris, when you go to share your screen, there's a little button at the bottom that says share computer sound. So that might help.
yeah, I know. For some reason, it's not letting me click that little box that says share sound. And I don't know why that is.
Chris, you can just play it without the sound too.
Okay, I can do that too, yeah. It's a shame. Anyway, here we go. Thank you, folks. Sorry about the sound. And now I'm going to shift it over to Cameron.
Thank you so much, Chris and Lori. What just wonderful peer wisdom on the peer culture and the peer model. It's just been a pleasure to hear all that. So yeah, my name's Cameron Farish. I'm someone who's been public about being in mental health recovery for about the past 10 years. I also have been involved in developing peer programs since 2008, when I was a clinician for about 8 years in a PROS program. And most recently, I'm divisional director at Liberty Resources, where I have developed 5 peer programs in the past 7 years. And I'm helping to kind of look at some other peer programs already established through the lens of the peer model. So how do you build a peer-informed program? It's really about having that. Can you guys hear me okay? Great. There is like from what we've already heard from some of my colleagues, some prerequisite knowledge prior to being able to create peer programs in a peer-informed way. So if that groundwork is not done, it can sometimes lead to peer staff and non-peer staff role confusion around what is having clarity around what the peer role will be. So what does it mean to be peer informed? It really means to, at every step of developing a peer program or hiring a peer inside, let's say, a clinic, which is, obviously the clinical, more medical model environment, it's looking through the peer model lens. And what that means is being aware of all the core values of the peer model and making sure that at every point of developing the program, that each point is aligned with all those core values. I was going to talk a little about recovery culture being really important. It's important to introduce and educate non-peer staff as well as peer staff prior to to lay down the groundwork prior to even hiring peers in a clinic. And my colleagues, Chris and Lori, did such a wonderful job of kind of illustrating what that culture is. Chris mentioned the 10 characteristics of recovery culture. Those are really in line with, they are a list of the core values of the peer model. One incredible tool that I use as kind of my compass around this work is the National Practice Guidelines for Peer Specialists and Supervisors. I'm just going to throw that in the chat. There you go. Next slide. So as someone who supervises peers or as someone who is developing a peer program, I really take on the perspective of being the protector of the peer model for that process. And Joanne and Chris and Lori have done a beautiful job of highlighting some of the historical, the history of where the peer movement has come from. And so because I don't work for an all peer led or peer driven agency, I'm developing peer programs within a more traditional agency. one of the distinctions that I make is that there's a difference between peer support versus peer services. In my opinion, intentional peer support could be a good example of peer support. It's fully mutual. No one is getting paid to do the support, versus once someone is getting paid, I consider that more peer support services. And right off the bat, it's somewhat pulling away from pure peer support because there is that paid aspect of it. So what's important as a manager or a supervisor is to recognize that and support the peer support staff to always be working on trying to dissolve any perceived or actual hierarchy. And part of the way that I do that is the pendulum practice. So what does that mean? So basically that means on one side is pure peer support, and potentially on the other side is the regulations of the program. And so as I'm developing every aspect of a program, starting with the job description, I am trying to keep the pendulum as close to the peer support way as possible, while honoring and being a lot, within the regulations or guidelines of that program. So it's really prioritizing the peer way inside the limits of the regulations. And so what does that look like as far as what would be an example of that? So one example is with the previous HCBS peer services. I was supervising a bunch of peer staff providing that. And one of the, one of the experiences of a lot of those positions were staff feeling pressure to get their numbers in to maintain and sustain their own position. And that really pulls away from the ability to have a more natural and relaxed and person-driven experience when you're supporting someone. So I helped to kind of dig down a little bit deeper and see, let's go back to that pendulum. Is there a way that we can have it be closer to the peer model within the regulations of HCBS? And so when we digged in a little bit further, we found out that you're allowed to bill up to 3 hours at a time. And prior to us finding that out, staff were only able to spend 1 hour at a time with people. That might sound like not that big of a deal, but when it comes to the core value of being person-driven, it's really important to try to create a dynamic that allows for the person to decide how much time they need versus the program having a need or a regulation that puts limits on that. So it's even more important to be aware of this when you're developing a peer position or peer program that is inside a non-peer program like the clinic. Some things that you can pay attention to are really looking at the initial paperwork, or actually all the paperwork that's required by a peer position. Because let's say you're having them do a NOMS assessment at the beginning of their engagement, or some type of social determinants of health, that really could get in the way of the natural engagement process. Again, a NOMS assessment or social determinants of health assessment is a program need, and we really want to create a container for the peer to be able to connect and only focus on the individual's needs in a natural way. So programs have data needs. It's great. I love data. I've grown to love data. And we also do data collection in a way that maintains the natural conversation. of the peer support. It's really important, for instance, not to have staff have to do long assessments, because it really puts the individual receiving the support in a passive role, again, answering questions that are the program's need and not their potential need. And just for the sake of time, I'm just going to move forward. And we really want to focus on from a strength-based. I really loved Chris and Lori kind of talking about the peer way is strength-based versus deficit-based. So if we're looking through that lens when we're developing like the workflow of a peer position, we really want to be mindful that some of the strengths that the peer support process brings is the ability to front load trust because of the shared lived experience, and that engagement piece. And so prioritizing and supporting the peer support staff's ability to focus just on engagement in the beginning. And I think some of my colleagues have really covered some of these points already. I just want to touch on why developing a position or a program in a peer-informed way is beneficial, because it can help reduce what's called peer drift. Peer drift is basically it's basically when we're having peer staff do things that are not within their role, and it could be unintentional, but the concept of peer drift is definitely something that's important to understand. And there's a lot of resources out there. Pat Deegan has a really good resource around that, understanding that. Having a supportive culture helps to set the tone to successfully address any potential friction points that may come up between the differences of the peer approach versus a clinical approach. That as we dance together, we might step on each other's toes, and that's going to happen. So, how do we set up a culture that is supportive for those moments, and that we can grow together instead of potentially have increased tension? And with that, I'd like to pass it off to my colleague Carrie Ann with Families Together. Thank you.
Thank you, Cameron. I am Carrie Ann Royer. I am the Director of Workforce Development and Training at Families Together in New York State. And I am a mother of 3 children who are on the autistic spectrum. I say children, they'll always be my children, but my youngest is 18. So I guess technically they're all young adults, but they'll always be my babies. I became a family peer advocate because while I was struggling through the hardest times I had with my children and trying to find services and trying to navigate the school system, the mental health system, the OPWDD system, I didn't have anybody to help me. I didn't have anybody that I could talk to in my life that had been through something like this. And when I found out that this program existed in my community and there was a job opening, I jumped at the chance to help families to be able to have that support that I didn't have and very much desperately needed. So I'm going to walk you through how to create a program that is family friendly, and then my colleague Amber will talk about being youth friendly as well. So what is a family driven approach? You may have heard the term before, but maybe you don't fully understand what that means. So family driven approach is the result when parents or caregivers are involved in responsible, challenging actions to create a positive social change. It means involving the parents and caregivers in planning and decision-making that affects their own child or youth and other families in the community. Family-driven approaches happen in partnerships that are structured to allow all parties involved to contribute, teach, and learn from each other. And that it would include the parent or caregiver, clinician, the CEO, may possibly, the board of directors. Everybody contributes equally in a family-driven approach. Some other phrases you may have heard would be family engagement, family voice, family participation, and family and governance. So what are the benefits of having a program or an agency that practices family-driven? So families have a primary decision-making role in the care of their own children, as well as policies and procedures that are governing other care for other children in their community. They're right at the table with the decision makers and policy makers. Family-driven approaches recognize that families are the experts on the needs and strengths of their own children and families. It allows for meaningful listening and strengthening of the parent and caregiver voice. And it involves parents and caregivers in an authentic leadership and decision-making capacity to enhance psychosocial development, civic engagement, and positive attitudes toward the future. So here's some examples of how an organization or program can practice family-driven approaches. There's a lot of examples. These are just a few. So parents and caregivers are on the planning team for events. Maybe they're the only planning team. The team is entirely parents and caregivers, or maybe it is a clinician or a program that is planning an event, and the parents and caregivers are on that planning team. Parents and caregivers plan and run support groups for other parents and caregivers. And it's important to note that in this example, there isn't another staff involved in the planning and facilitating process of this. There may be some guidance, some training that comes from staff in your organization, but the parents and caregivers are there to plan, run, facilitate support groups for other parents and caregivers. That would be a true family-driven approach to this. Parents and caregivers are asked first about their goals and desires for their child and youth. So when you're setting up goals on maybe a service plan or treatment plan, asking the parents and caregivers first what they would like goals to be set for before writing them down, before putting them in that plan, and asking the parent and caregiver, does this look good to you? Is there anything you would like to change? Before even doing that step, ask the parents and caregivers first, what are your goals for your child to get out of working in this program? Parents and caregivers have access to family peer support services. Again, as we've been talking for all these weeks and for today, during today's webinar, that peer-on-peer support is so very important. So having access to family peer support services. Parents and caregivers have input in decisions that can potentially affect other families, such as policies, procedures, program development, and even staff hiring. There's some agencies that ask a parent or a caregiver to be involved in the interviewing process, be involved in developing a program, be involved in making procedures or revising procedures and policies. Parents and caregivers with lived experience are on the agency's board of directors. So all the way up from the very top, you have that parent and caregiver voice with the lived experience. Okay, and I'm going to pass it along to my colleague Amber, who'll go through the youth guided approaches.
Hey all, Amber here. Just wanted to talk about what is youth guided approaches and what a youth voice looks like in organizations that hire youth peers. A youth guided approach is the result of when young people are involved in responsible and challenging actions to create positive social change. Keywords here being responsible and challenging. Allowing the space for these types of actions ultimately allow us to feel like we are creating change, not just for ourselves, but for other people and for the org we work for. It's important and it's valuable to have peer voice when engaging other peers, but also just this means involving youth in planning and in making decisions and having them affect others. Youth guided approaches happen in youth adult partnerships that are structured so that both groups can contribute and teach and learn from each other. It's not a youth or adult approach, it's a collaboration of both. Other phrases that we use could be youth engagement, youth voice, youth participation, youth and governance. Benefits of youth guided approaches can be acknowledging that just preventing negative risk behaviors alone is not just the only answer to having a successful transition into adulthood, but preventing such factors is just a part of it. So if we include positive and reinforcement of what it means to have developmental supports and opportunities, this could mean that we would be gaining the skills and attributes to be healthy and contribute to our communities as youth with the help of adults. Values of the role of youth-adult relationships are a strategy to encourage positive development and involving youth and young people in authentic leadership and decision-making capacities does again enhance psychosocial development, civic engagement, and positive attitudes towards the future. Examples of some youth-guided approaches are the following. So if you have a team and they're planning an event, it's important that you include youth voice in that, especially if the event is for youth. Youth plan and run and support other youth who are running groups. Youth are asked first about their goals and desires. Usually it's taking the approach that youth and young people do know of themselves and of other youth. So it's important that we include youth in any capacity that, or in any decision-making room that is being used to guide their choices or guide their goals or guide their future. Youth have access to youth peer support services. I feel like that's a given, and that's important just to note that when you do have youth in certain spaces, the idea that they're the only youth or just their only voice is the only voice of youth at the time, it could be troublesome, and I think it just doesn't allow for the youth to express themselves as they should. Youth have input in decisions that can potentially affect other youth, and youth policies, procedures, and program development. Again, like Carrie Ann said, having a youth in the decision-making process of like staff hiring, that's also very important. I think if you really value the voice of youth, then you should have them at the table when doing such decisions and creating such spaces. Youth adults with lived experience are on the agency's board of directors. So it doesn't mean that they have to be at the board of directors all the time, but if you do have a board of directors, we want or would like youth voice involved there. So if we do have people with lived experience on there, it could provide an easier approach to having that youth voice. And I'll pass it to Bree. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I've learned so much from today, and I just appreciate everybody being here. So my name is Bree Ryman. I'm the Vice President for Practice Improvement and Consulting at the National Council for Mental Wellbeing. And I'm just here to talk a little bit about an opportunity. I know that we might be running short on time or overtime, so I will be super brief here. I want to talk about the Certified Community Behavioral Health Clinic model and an opportunity that we had, in 2019, it seems like forever ago, working with NIAPers to really talk about the opportunities to enhance the peer provider network within the Certified Community Behavioral Health Clinic demonstration model. There's some really great opportunities here, and we've been working together with a lot of peer-run organizations to think this through. So a little bit of background, the CCBHC, or Certified Community Behavioral Health Clinic demonstration, is really a national model that is being integrated into community mental health and substance use organizations. The CCBHC model is a federal designation, and it really establishes a standard of care within behavioral health clinics. And we're really excited about this opportunity because it's just enhancing the way that care is delivered within our mental health and substance use organizations across the country. So CCBHCs are required to provide comprehensive trauma-informed, recovery-oriented care within their clinics. They offer a full array of standardized services that require both mental health and substance use services, as well as primary care and screening services. And they've established community partnerships outside of the four walls of the clinic, recognizing that people don't always just receive care within mental health and substance use organizations. So creating partnerships with the criminal justice system, hospitals, primary care, other sort of non-traditional partnerships to really provide that wraparound support that a family or individual will need as part of their journey. Next slide. Oh, I think I can do it. Maybe there. Oh, there we go. So some of the requirements of a CCBHC, so if a CCBHC clinic is designated, which means there's sort of two pathways that a CCBHC can become a CCBHC. There's grant funding from SAMHSA that runs like a traditional grant, or the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. I'm trying to work on my acronyms and language here. So SAMHSA provides a grant directly to a clinic, and then a clinic has to run the course of a 4 to 5 year long grant, implementing these required services. There's sort of another pathway for CCBHCs, and the one that we want to see more routinely is when a state implements CCBHC services within the clinics, the CCBHCs, using what's called a PPS, or a prospective payment system, through Medicaid reimbursement. We want to see this because it's just much more sustainable, as we know, through Medicaid funding than through grant support that usually ends, and then we're sort of hobbling together things to make things work after the grant goes away. So the Medicaid route is the preferred route, and these CCBHCs are required to provide the set of services that you see here. These are the required services that all CCBHCs have to provide. So those are things around like staffing, and doing a needs assessment around adequate staffing, looking at the availability and accessibility of services, and providing things like routine 24/7 access to care. I just lost my slides. I'll try to remember if we can't get back to them, or I'll give it a minute here. They just went away.
Sorry about that. I don't know
No,
what happened.
That's okay. I think we're back. CCBHCs are required to provide comprehensive care coordination. And scope of services include 9 required services, such as person-centered, family-centered, recovery-oriented care, as well as things like primary care screening. So things like SBIRT, or screening, brief intervention, referral to treatment. Quality and other reporting. So there's 21 other quality measures that all CCBHCs have to implement. And then finally, organizational authority, or governance and accreditation. So looking at consumer representation and governance committees, things that we've talked about today, as well as appropriate state accreditation. So really, if you think about, if you're sort of used to the federally qualified health center model, this is really enhancing the behavioral health clinic model up to that standard, and will also, very importantly, provide more support, infrastructure, and payment for these essential services in mental health and substance use organizations. So these are just a couple of quotes. I'll let you read them. That we recently did an impact survey of our CCBHCs, and usually we'll do those pretty regularly so that we can just check in on how CCBHCs are doing, what support they need from the National Council or others to just support their implementation of services. And these quotes are just really demonstrating the peer workforce as part of the routine care that's being provided, and the value of the peer workforce in the CCBHC clinics that are being implemented across the country. So we're really excited about the opportunities here to really just integrate peer services into the CCBHCs as a routine part of the care that CCBHCs are delivering. I kind of touched on these. These are just required services. Those in blue they must be delivered directly by a CCBHC, those services that you see in blue. And the ones that you see in orange are, they can be delivered by the CCBHC directly or by a designated collaborating organization. So CCBHCs are also required to establish partnerships with what we call DCOs to provide services as that wraparound support care. So back in 2019, we did an event jointly with NIAPers to really talk about how do we prepare CCBHCs to really enhance their workforce. And what we did is we pulled together multiple certified community behavioral health clinics from across the country, as well as peer-run organizations. And we talked about how are these partnerships occurring, how are CCBHCs in terms of their readiness to engage with peer-run organizations for really elaborate partnerships, how are CCBHCs hiring peers and really integrating peers into the routine sort of fabric of care at the CCBHC location. And following that convening, which I think maybe the resources were provided, if not, we'll make sure that they are. There was a paper that came out from that, as well as this organizational self-assessment tool. But what we really learned from that is that we needed to work on preparing CCBHCs around the cultural sort of readiness for enhancing peer services within their sort of fabric of care. So we developed an organizational self-assessment with NIAPers and other peer-run organizations, as well as our team at the National Council. And the OSA, or the organizational self-assessment, is really a performance improvement tool to help CCBHCs with sort of a self-reflective process to how they want to enhance partnerships with peer-run organizations. The tool is structured around 4 change concepts. And organizations can walk through this organizational self-assessment with a team and just work together with their leadership, their administrative team, their clinical members, and other stakeholders to complete the OSA, and then really aggregate the responses and develop a work plan around how they want to integrate peer-delivered services within the CCBHC. So it's really sort of elevating that standard of care within the CCBHCs and really focusing in on enhancing peer services within the CCBHCs. So we're just very excited about this tool. It's actually being, since it was 2019 that it has been developed, it's being updated by our peer advisory council. We have put together a peer advisory council at the National Council and are including people with lived and living experience to help us shape the direction of this tool moving forward. And so we are currently updating it, but I did provide these resources so that you can at least access the version that was originally developed. And as soon as we have an updated version, I will make sure you all have a copy of that as well. So we also are available to provide support through the National Council, through technical assistance. We run the National CCBHC Technical Assistance Center, and we're really looking forward to building these partnerships and providing, just the appropriate support needed for CCBHCs to integrate these services into their care. So with that, I think I will pass it back to Amber at this point.
Hey, so actually we're thinking about passing it to Rebecca right now, just because we are short on time. Would we like Rebecca to continue?
Yeah, we're gonna pass it over to Rebecca and she'll just close us out. So thank you.
Thank you all. So I am here today to share a little bit about contracting for services, but we are so short on time. You will get the slides and just want to encourage and highlight, obviously, our peer-run organizations that are part of the Wellness Collaborative of New York are the experts in providing peer support. There's a lot of different avenues for contracting for services, and we certainly can discuss those and explore more opportunities in the collaboration call next week. So don't want to hold everyone over, and I'll pass to Yvette to close us out. Thank you so much for everyone who's listening, and please, I'll drop my email in the chat if you do have additional questions, even just based on this couple slides today.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you to all the presenters on the call today. I do appreciate you guys staying with us. We are running a little short on time, but did want to just remind folks that the slides and the recording will be made available to you on our landing page, peertac.org, so you can find them there. Also, please join us if you have questions for our consultation call coming up next week. Our presenters will be there and will be able to answer any questions that you may have. And so with that, I just want to thank everyone. Thank you for joining, and we hope to see you at next week's consultation call. Thank you so much.